Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Treasury Elite Leadership Series. I would like to thank all our viewers and members for supporting this noble cause of Treasury Elite, whose main objective is networking, knowledge sharing, and mentoring. Time and again, we bring in world class speakers and thought leaders across the world in the field of treasury and global financial markets and conduct various programs and webinars and conferences in different formats. Treasury Elite Leadership Series is one such format where we learn from industry leaders about their experiences of running their finance functions and treasuries, opportunities and challenges they encountered, and broad trends they see for the future. Today, once again, we have Charles Billard, one of the distinguished names with a wide spectrum of experience across different business verticals. Charles joined Sanofi in 2014 as a head of strategy and business development for Global Consumer Healthcare Division. Since 2016, Charles has been heading financial planning and performance department for the General and Emerging Markets Global Business Unit. Charles is currently the CFO for South Asia since July 2018. And prior to Sanofi, Charles also spent 9 years in strategy consulting with the BCG. Charles has a master's degree from École Centrale Paris Engineering School. So, welcome, Charles. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. All good. आप कैसे हैं?
Very nice. So, since you have talked in Hindi, I would also like to talk to you a little bit on French, which I know. Comment ça va?
Very well, thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Charles, you have graduated from strategy in BCG to business development, performance, and analysis in Sanofi, and now you are heading the finance function for South Asia. That's a pretty wide area that you have covered. So we would love to know about your transitions across various verticals and three major learnings that you have gathered in all these years.
Well, it's true that actually, from Sanofi perspective, or I mean across the industry, it's not so usual to have non-finance people taking a CFO position. And actually, I mean, I've been meeting a lot of my peers in India, and most of them are chartered accountants. So I felt lonely as an engineer, but it's the story. I mean, the very important thing to have in mind is that strategy and finance are closely related, because eventually strategy is all about where do you want to allocate your resources in order to maximize the growth, profitability, and sustainability of your company. So in close to 10 years I was working in strategy. I was spending actually most of my time very close to the finance teams, and after doing 2.5 years of strategy at Sanofi, it felt almost natural, as an evolution to go to finance. What could have been less natural is that they could, for them to accept me in a way, because I didn't have any of the hard technical skills that the job requires. But I think Sanofi and other companies are making bets that you can bring a different perspective, and that's what I'm striving to do. You are asking what are the big learnings. The first thing is, finance, as in any department of any company, it's about people first. So the first thing I did when joining a team is making sure that I have the right team close to me. I bring them a vision of what we want to do together, which is definitely not running the business as it was. You have to really consider what you want to change, and build motivation, and that thing, it can take you anywhere. And it's also what I'm looking for in my finance teams is not only people who have hard skills either in treasury or in tax and others, but it's also people who can grow beyond that, become managers and so on. One other thing is still about people, by the way, is about the fact that what I've seen, what I loved in finance in general is that it's a politics-free department. You can have political decisions and so on. And I felt that the people in finance were very much like-minded I was, which was, I'm a very simple, rational person. So if I agree with something rationally, I will share that like that. But we can also disagree. There is no bias of perspective. It's more about hard facts and aligning on some hypotheses. So you can build a very politics-free, very transparent, and very compliant atmosphere. And you need to trust your teams in any occasion. But when you're in finance, if you don't have 100% trust in your head of accounting, in your head of treasury, then you're in deep trouble. So it's really one thing that is very important, I think, in this department. And then the last thing I learned, which I learned not only in finance but also before, is that unfortunately the immediate comfort often goes against the long-term peace of mind. And every month, every quarter, when you think of all the things you have to do, because we're a function with a lot of things to do on a day-to-day basis. We have closings, we have forecasting activities, we have treasury management, basically cash flow optimization processes. All of this is what we're paid for, but we're also paid to actually challenge the current status quo. And sometimes it's very important to take the time to step back and accept to lose a bit of habits and lose a bit of the expertise of how you are doing things in order to overall improve the process. And it applies for processes, it applies for people. One thing I noticed when I joined the finance team in Sanofi India, many people were in the same position for a long time, which for me is an issue for many reasons. It's an issue in terms of motivation. It's an issue because once you've been seeing the one job for 6 years, it's hard for you to step back and think of it a different way. So after less than a year, I moved almost everyone in the management of finance teams. And I'm just impressed by how it works. I'm impressed because it shows that people who are experts in one job can actually become very good in another job. And my current head of treasury was not in treasury before, but he had enough hard skills to take the job, and he's doing a great job. People actually come with a good mind, but also a challenging mind, and they say, okay, why were we doing these things that way? Why are we not doing it the other way? And you don't have this challenge when you keep the same people in the same position forever. So for me, it's one illustration of how the fact that, of course, it's easier to have the guy who knows everything about treasury staying for 10 years. But, I think it's actually a big loss of opportunity. It's even a compliance risk in a way, because if something's wrong, you will never learn it. So for many reasons, it's good sometimes to, push yourself out of your comfort zone, like or HR friends would say, and stretch yourself into changing the status quo.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Of course, job rotation is so important in India. I mean, I've started seeing companies following it, and that's a good initiative, Charles. And I'm sure you would have had your very, very pleasant surprises doing it, where, as you said, the entire treasury angle changed. In fact, we have seen across companies that companies, they just run the old way of running treasuries, and somebody comes in the picture and it just changed the entire spectrum of the hedging decisions or managing the MIS or getting technology in place. So having said that, now since you're running and looking at the overall Southeast Asia angle of financial management, and since your parent is in France, you would be having a lot of areas where would require very strong risk management in place. For example, you would be having exposures in various currencies. You would be having your transaction translation and economic risk in your balance sheet, and then you have to remit your dividends to your parent, etc., which will also lead to a lot of translation risk and possibly an exposure to different currencies. So what kind of systems you advise that companies like yours should follow to have a proper and efficient risk management policies? Since a lot of the treasury people are listening this, I think it would be a good takeaway for them.
So you did mention different aspects of this complexity. One of them is clearly the forex part. If I want to start by being positive, I mean, India, fortunately, is not a massive risk area in terms of forex, contrary to certain countries in LATAM or other countries I won't name. You know, you don't wake up and notice that you've lost 20% in euros overnight because of some events. So that's on the good side. Nevertheless, of course, it's something we manage actively. There are a few things we're doing which I think, you know, I don't know how common they are, but I think they're common sense, but they're important to do. One is we're doing a lot of natural hedging by making sure that our imports and exports are balancing in a way. And it's not that our total value of import and export are not exactly matching, but not everything we import is in euros either. So what we've been making sure over time is that just simply because of what we import in hard currencies and what we export in hard currencies, we had a kind of equilibrium that was giving us, you know, a sort of protection, and that's one way to naturally hedge ourselves, at least at the local level, for Sanofi India. And one thing I didn't mention is that Sanofi India Limited, which is one of the legal entities we have in India, is listed. So of course we have even a lot more obligation than what any private company would have to. We have minority shareholders that we have to protect the interest of, and so on. So it brings a whole new level of complexity. One second thing that we do is because of what I said, which is you have to differentiate countries on which you have a strategic risk on the currency versus a more you know, short-term risk, which is if you're in a country where you know that the balance is not favorable and you're going to lose currency, you want to do some strategic hedging. It's not the case for India. And if you look at I'm not looking dollar too much because we consolidate at Sanofi in euro. So I'm looking at euro, and because we don't see such a strategic risk, over 5 years or 10 years, the INR has held quite well against euro. It's much more of a tactical hedging. So basically making sure that your net exposure at the end of each month is covered. And this is, by the way we do it, to make sure that you know, what you end up having is as close as possible to what you've booked. And it's more what I call tactical hedging. I wouldn't start doing some more strategic hedging, which I don't think is justified in India, especially if you look at the euro versus INR, which would bring much more financial costs for a very questionable benefit. It's actually a question we've had. We've looked at you know, what we could have done in the past few years, and I don't think there is for us much sense on this. So that's one aspect of what you were asking in terms of having a promoter company which is in Europe versus here. You were mentioning dividends, so that's also an interesting story because Sanofi in India is very cash positive. I mean, I'm talking especially for the listed part, which is a quite successful business. So we have been sitting for a few years on too much cash, which, by the way, some shareholders were not happy with. And when I arrived, I had this question of why didn't we do anything? And I think it's true that for a MNC company in India, you do have a number of things that you can consider doing with your cash. Some companies are doing share buybacks, either, you know, because they want to increase their ownership or for other reasons. You can of course distribute dividend and so on. Our level of redistribution is already close to 40-50% on a normal basis. So you could say, I mean, it's quite comparable to most other MNCs, but we do have to balance basically. Indeed, it relates, by the way, to the first topic. We do have to balance how much cash you're generating with interest by investing in India, and until last year, India was nothing comparable to France. And somehow, you know, you can be very happy with fixed-term deposits with very low risk. I mean, the remaining risk is a forex risk. But as I was saying, since there is no strategic risk, it's more a tactical risk. You always have you can always decide to delay the cash move. I mean, the cash transfer from INR to euro you can do it later or earlier. You have a choice. But I mean, when you compare the rates in India versus Europe, you are very tempted to keep your cash in India and invest in India on some fixed term deposits or something like that. So it's true that it has been what we were doing for a long time, with relatively balanced risk in terms of forex. Now, if you look at the news, we have announced a big special dividend this year in Sanofi India. We're going to distribute, if I include the annual dividend plus a special dividend, close to 100 million euros. The reason behind that, well, first of all, investing in India in terms of deposits today is much less interesting than it used to be, let's be honest.
Right.
Not to mention, it goes along with the deterioration of the exchange rates. So, that was not true initially, but what we've seen the past 2 years is that along with the GDP growth deceleration, it's true that we were seeing these rates going down. So the amount of spreads between Europe and India was getting smaller or doing less justification. And then at some point, it was also in relation to our minority shareholders who were saying, if you don't invest it in buying another company, there is less interest of keeping it. So we decided to pay this special dividend. I have to say, by the way, that the idea of paying the dividend was before the DDT removal, which of course came as a very nice gift because of course it's helping us definitely, and I think it's making India a very, these two moves, the evolution of the corporate income tax and the removal of dividend distribution tax, I think are going to change a lot the way that FDI is looked at in India. Because I have to say that I talk to many people who believe India is a cash trap, which is absolutely not true. I mean, between the removal of DDT, the fact that we have relatively numerous tax treaties with Europe, with the US and other countries, India is anything but a cash trap. India is actually, there is a local market risk and so on, but if you are successful in India, you can absolutely bring back some cash to a parent company in the US or in Europe with much less trouble than many emerging markets. And I think for this, as for other things, India lacks a bit of the right image outside of, the usual partners of India being US and UK would know about this. But I think in continental Europe, there is a very wrong perspective that India is a cash trap. And it's not a Sanofi view. I've been discussing with other companies who are having the same bias. And I think that's, by the way, something that the government needs to work on. They're doing a lot of efforts on improving the easiness to do business in India, but they have to work a lot on the communication into Europe and other countries, because it will take time for people to understand that their view is probably very far from the reality of today.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. Of course, the returns of India have declined significantly in the recent past because of the low interest rates. Of course, people who are doing business in Europe were finding extremely lucrative in India. The carry was very, very nice earlier in terms of Euro INR or GBP INR or the fixed deposit rates in India or the bond yields in India. Yes, of course, it has become a separate topic of discussion now, that how the interest rates, along with the developed markets in India, also the interest rates have come down. So the carry has significantly come down, and generating alpha has become more and more difficult. Of course,
but let's be clear. We're in a situation which is very specific and which will last 1-2 years. Let's hope it's less than 2 years. Let's hope that either Sanofi or any other company finds a vaccine early enough for people to be protected, and then you're going to be back to business. So the fact of having such a low carry, I think, is going to be true for 1.5 years, 2 years. But I think that structurally, you will never have high interest rates in Europe anymore, while it's much too early for India to get a Japanese or Europe style interest trend. So, I mean, the situation will come back.
Since you have touched upon the low interest rates in the US, I am excited to ask you this question about the recent bond issuance by the Austrian people, which is 100-year-old bond, as if there is going to be no tomorrow and there's never been going to have inflation, and it has been oversubscribed by 8 times. I mean, what's happening in Europe? I mean, I would love to know that are we not going to see an inflation ever, or people are so optimistic about a 100-year-old bond? I mean, what's it going around? Charles, what do you think?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that, but what I can share is we were saying the same things about Japan 30 or 40 years ago. And Japan has proved that you can stay a zero inflation economy for a very, very long time. Is it a good thing? Definitely not. It's not a good thing. It's rather a sign that we have lost the key to real structural growth. And you know the underlying things are not favorable. I mean, population is declining. The level of basically the access to people have already access the level of equipment. Sorry, I was looking for the level of equipment is already very high and will not really increase. The salaries are not increasing as much, not only because every salary is not increasing much, but also the share of people who are working is not increasing, it's declining actually. So, I mean, it's just the fact that we are not creating wealth as much as we used to. We used to live in Europe on productivity improvements. But I mean, in the next 100 years, I think people are betting that it's going to be the same old Europe, more or less. And it's a bad thing in terms of growth and so on, but it's also a kind of defensive move for many players. And you know that Sanofi actually issued a bond a few years back with a negative rate.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. That's the advantage that companies in Europe and US get. Of course, India is not in such a comfortable position to get so low interest rates. Of course, we are moving towards lower carry. But anyways, now this is a separate discussion altogether. But let's have your thoughts on what are the 3 or 4 major technological changes that you are looking in the future? What are the kind of trends that you are seeing across companies in terms of innovations? It could be in the area of blockchain or artificial intelligence, or it could be cloud technology. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any trend across?
It's a difficult question in a way because I believe in one hand there is going to be a massive amount of change, but there is also a massive amount of buzzwords in this whole sector. And I think blockchain is a very interesting technology, but for I mean, many of our viewers would have some, at least high-level knowledge of what blockchain is. Blockchain is not going to be everywhere. Blockchain has very identified usages, and these usages will increase over time. They will be tested and so on. But no, blockchain is not the next internet. And apart, if you're in banking system, for instance, or if you're maybe in supply chain industry, there are some specific industries that might be revolutionized by blockchain. But when I hear people talk about blockchain like it's going to be the next internet revolution, I don't believe it's correct. AI, it's a bit different. AI, we put behind AI a lot of things. We have been doing AI in a way already for some years. RPA is nothing but AI. We've been doing AI in compliance, for instance, in Sanofi. We use some learning algorithms to improve fraud detection on our systems. So it's not new. What I think is new is what they'll be able to do. And the big change is to say, could we have today some AI telling you how to optimize your deposits? For sure. I mean, I don't know if it exists today, but there is probably a possibility that this comes very, very soon. Will you have someone, an AI, giving you advice on how to optimize your overall cash strategy? I don't think it's for tomorrow. So I think it's not that it's not a revolution, but it's not a revolution that will happen in the next 2 years. It's going to be continuous evolution that. And it's true that probably in 10, 20 years, when we look back at the way we were doing things, it will look very archaic to us. But I don't think you won't have one company, one smart kids company coming to you and transforming your company upside down. But by the way, one of the learnings you have in AI, and actually you can watch some videos from BCG on this, is that people believe it's a technology issue when it's not a technology issue. It's a change management issue. And 20% when you're in a big corporate and you want to really change the way people work, 20% is about technology and 80% is about really making sure that people are taken along in this change, and what the so-called the change management and so on. So it's not because the technology itself is evolving very rapidly that we will be able as corporates to evolve so rapidly. And we in the pharma associations, I discuss with Indian and non-Indian companies in terms of within finance, how do we digitalize our processes? But AI would be a nice discussion. I mean, it looks good to say that you're working on AI and we're looking at it, but there are many things to improve that are far from AI. And I'm thinking of. I mean, we are still in a situation where we pay a lot of people in 2020. So before when we think of digitalization and improving the efficiency of our treasury function, for instance, there are so many things we can do without even thinking of AI. And AI for me would be kind of the cherry on the cake. But it's not like the rest is done, which I think is.
So that's an interesting point you mentioned, Charles. So what are the 2 or 3 things which you feel that companies need to change or innovate in the areas of treasury? I mean, of course, AI is a separate discussion, it's a very big thing. But then what are the small things and small changes which can create a huge impact in the treasuries across companies, which you were mentioning just right now?
So the one thing, I mean, this is more specific to my industry, so it's hard to comment on a wider scale. But I think what's interesting is in India, you have actually a very heterogeneous adoption of technology along one value chain. And if I take one illustration, in the pharma industry, you have patients who are actually very tech savvy in many cases. And when someone buys their insulin, we see a lot of people who actually would buy their insulin online, even if they're 50 years, 60, 70 years old. Maybe their kids will help them or something like that. So there is a high demand actually for these online options. Even though we love the service in India, I think they've watched that you can have a very good service in online sales. And by the way, I mean, you would be amazed the level of service you get from one company like Amazon, for instance, in India versus the rest is not at all the same. I think you have to realize that the level of expectation in terms of quality of service you have in India is in a way higher. Yes, you might have delays or things like that, but everything is made to facilitate the life of the customer, or the patient. If I'm in France, I want to resend an item which is defective, I'm going to have to go to the post office. I'm going to have to pay for a stamp and so on, which makes it horrible. Right. We live in a country where people are used that, their chemists bring the drugs home. And the same way, I mean, Amazon is taking your defective device and bringing it back. So I think people are quickly realizing that buying online is not a loss of service, because online companies have been smart enough to maintain a high level of service rather than try to save costs on this aspect. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have pharma industry, and I'm not going to say we are, at the edge of technology, but we are eager to. We are eager to dematerialize all payments. I mean, supplier payments, cash collection, and so on. But in between, you have some elements which are not the same. And I was talking about chemists. The fact is that because of regulation in India, it's you don't have a real structuration of the trades in India. Well, I'm talking about the stockists, the wholesalers. I'm talking about the chemists. So your current chemist is still a small shop with absolutely no online option. I mean, the best thing is you can call for your product, but if you their ability to think of digital transaction and so on is very limited, and it's the same for many wholesalers. So you end up in a situation where the lowest common denominator, which is driving the level of digitalization of the value chain. And what I was saying earlier is that one of the things that COVID brought, which was positive in a way, is that our customers, or direct customers who are the stockists, I think they realized that relying on checks is not so efficient. And I mean, there's been a move towards RTGS because I mean, you realize that with banks being closed for some days, or even inability to move from point A to point B physically, in a way it helped us. But I feel there is still a lot more to do. Where we have to work together, the pharma industry, the trade associations and the trade companies, in order to optimize the whole value chain together, because it cannot be one layer by layer. It has to be across the layers if we really want to make it efficient. So
that's pretty interesting perspective. And since you touched COVID, and I would like to stress a little bit more on that in this COVID, of course, we entered into various kind of situations. So could you share some innovations or cost saving ideas that as a company you discovered, or as a team you discovered, which can help in improving the effectiveness in overall finance functions?
I mean, in terms of treasury, as for the rest of finance, what we discovered is that we can very well live without any physical exchange. And I mean, COVID is negative for many things, including for business, by the way, even though some people believe that pharma is going to gain from it. It's not really favorable for us either. But it's favorable in terms of realizing that we can live without physical exchanges. There will still be gaps today because, from a tax perspective, the law has not yet evolved. But I was quite positively surprised by the fact that there were some easing decisions in terms of, for instance, how do you hold an AGM? How do you hold a board meeting digitally and things like that? And the reality is, today we are working without physical invoices, and we've been working like that for 3 months, and everyone is fine with it. And you do have to adjust a bit your process, but I mean, you still have companies, and including in Sanofi, we still have people who are scanning invoices physically. Is it really normal in 2020? I don't think so.
That's pretty interesting. So, Charles, what do you feel that as a veteran, the areas or skills that you want the young people in treasury, and since you have a background towards business development, I will extend that question to that. And of emerging companies. So there are treasury professionals and there are young budding people who are just in the middle management of emerging companies. How would you ask them to invest their time to help them to grow their skills in the next 5 years? If you could give some examples, that would be great.
So I'd give three things. One is keep learning. Keep learning, because a job where you're not learning anymore is not going to keep you motivated anymore. And if your day-to-day activities are not giving you the learning, you always have the option either to being trained on other things that you want to do later, or asking for more. And people who are starting to be a bit bored in their work, they have two options. Either they just lose their motivation and become less good, or they talk to their manager and they say, okay, I want to do this project. I'd like to help on that. I have some capacity to do more. Please give me more. I think this is really an important mindset, an important attitude. And it's very tempting sometimes to say, well, I mean, my days are long enough. your days are long enough, you're satisfied with your job. Not say at the same time, my days are long enough and I feel I'm bored by my job. Then you have to do something different. The second thing is people need to understand that technical. We do have a chance of having a very, very good system in India for chartered accountants, which is a blessing in a way for a finance function, because you will have people who are. I mean, we have a plethora of people who are technically very good. But the counterpart of that is that being technically good is not good enough, because you will find thousands and thousands of people who can pretend the same technical skills. And eventually, one person will grow more than another. It's because showing, agility in terms of work setting, this learning envy that I was mentioning, management skills also. These are all the skills that eventually will make a difference. And it's somehow surprising, because finance is an expert function. It's not just common sense and so on. So you need expertise, but it would be very wrong to believe that expertise is going to be the only thing. And to give you one illustration, the controlling function, which is not in treasury, but just to talk about the FBPs. It might be true that in the past, in some companies, the guy was here to verify that the people had the budget to spend, or help holding the pencil for building a forecast. It's not what we ask anymore, because every relatively low value added or transactional activity will be replaced by systems, and has been to a large extent replaced by a system. What you bring is someone who's actually able to bring some insights, understands the activity of the person he's speaking to, and so on and so forth. So it's not only core finance skills that you need. You need people who are able to actually, understand exactly what's happening on the other side of the room. So that's a second thing. The last thing, which is important, which goes a bit with the learning and so on, is the way you approach your role. Especially if you grow into medium or senior roles, don't expect people to tell you what your job is. You're already lucky if you have a job description. So my advice is just fill the space. Don't step on anyone's shoes. There is no need to step on people's shoes. But if you see something that is not done and that you have a legitimacy to do it. Don't wait for people to tell you to do it. And over time, people will realize that the value that you bring is basically this. If you're an engine of evolution, if you're making sure that things are done, rather than saying, well, this is not in my to-do list, it will make a big difference. And I have had one or two situations in India or in France before where I've had some relatively senior managers telling me, this is not in my job desk. This is finished. I mean, in my mind, a person who tells me that when they're a medium or senior manager, I don't even want to think about them anymore.
That is so relevant, Charles. I mean, your 3 points that you mentioned, continuous learning, and only because you have a chartered account degree, that doesn't mean that you will grow in life. I think understanding what the client needs, and the client in your case could be your boss, it could be your CEO, and giving some analytical approach towards things rather than just doing a 2 + 2 = 4. And lastly, when you say it's not my job, it simply means that you will never grow in life. So attitude is so much important to decide how you grow in life. I mean, Charles, I don't know you much, but then what I can tell you from the short conversation that we had is that the way you grew in various verticals of life, right from BCG, got into finance and planning, and now heading a CFO, I was pleasantly surprised seeing your bio. But now I understand that how being a business guy, when you are transformed to a finance guy, you have understood business in a holistic manner. And I think that is what is working for you as a person. And I'm sure that's a very important take for all the young people who are listening, that your attitude is what drives you in a long run. I mean, a CFO or a CEO does not know everything, but his attitude towards running the business, his attitude to be proactive in business really helps him grow. That's a very, very important point, Charles, that you have put across. And I think that's a very important takeaway from everyone who's listening us today. And lastly, Charles, uh, how do you manage your personal and professional life together? You stay in a wonderful place, which is Pali Hill. In evenings, we go for a walk, we go for runs, and the best gentry in Bombay is what we can find in Pali Hill. Tell us more about what Charles is like.
That's probably a bit influenced by my earlier years in consulting. I've learned to, depassionate work, meaning if I don't have to work late, I'm happy finishing at 7 p.m. and enjoying some time with my daughters. I have two daughters, having a family dinner and so on. And then I know that there will be other days because I have something which is very important to finish or something. Then I will finish at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. and I don't care much in a way because I've learned in consulting that life is a marathon. You have to pick your rhythm. No manager can impose you your rhythm because if someone is imposing your rhythm, which is not made for you, that's how you burn out. That's how you become depressed and so on. So I've always made sure that I had enough ability to manage my time so that I'm doing what I believe I can. And yes, I probably work relatively numerous hours, but what is important is not the number of hours, is that I feel fine with the hours I'm making. And I think that's really the most important thing because that's why people, for instance, leave consulting after 2-3 years telling you they had a horrible life. And I'm telling them I was planning to stay 2 years in BCG and then I stayed 9 because in a way I was lucky enough to find the right balance and I was not feeling frustrated that I could not do this or that. And I mean, on the other hand, it's true that I would always be happy to see my daughters more, but that's what COVID brought me. I spent days with them for 3 months, and they were participating to some of the calls. It was a funny experience. No, but joke aside, it's really a personal experience. One thing that I can say, which is important as much in India as in France, and it's about gender balance. We have numerous discussions in France about gender balance. And what I'm telling to my peers, male peers in particular, is the only way to have gender balance is not to make sure that you have X% of people, of profiles which are female and so on, is just to start by showing that you as a man, as a father, you want to spend time with your children as much as the mothers. And my wife was working when we were in France. She was also a CFO of a company, of a tech company. So we basically had the same job. So, we were sharing the nights. Someone had to pick the kids from the nanny at 7:30 p.m. So every other night it would be her or myself. And I think this is the only way it works. And if we don't change this, which by the way is a win-win situation because you will have more time with your families. And it also makes it less difficult for female to access jobs because otherwise, you will have, in France at least, I couldn't say for India, but there is always a concern which is not normal that people will say, oh, she has 3 kids, so she will want to go home early or things like that. It should apply as much for the guys or the girls. I mean, in a normal situation, one should consider that, yeah, maybe she has 3 kids, but maybe the husband is able to take over when she's not able to do it. So, my final advice on time management is find the right equilibrium for you and your family, because once again, if no company can impose that to you on the long term, because if it's imposed to you and you're not happy with it, you will last 2 years and then you'll burn out or you will resign because you're frustrated. So it's I've been a bit fatalist on this, and I've said I'll work the way I can work, and if it's fine, it's fine. If it's not, ram bharose.
That's a lovely perspective. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. That's what Charles learned in BCG, and he is spending some excellent time with his daughters and his wife today. And the definition of gender bias is very different for Charles. I'm really pleased to talk to you, Charles. I think I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's one of our finest conversations that we have had in our leadership series. A very genuine, humble conversations with Charles Villard. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for joining us. Hope you have a lovely day going forward and lovely going months. And I hope we come back to normal in COVID very, very soon. And look forward to talk to you again sometime and be part of Treasury Elite initiative. Thank you so much, Charles, for taking out
Thanks
time
a lot
today.
for having me.
Thank you.